Hi, everyone, and welcome to Signature West Podcast. I'm your host, Sam West from Palm Springs, California. My guest today is Lila Glasoe Francese. She is the author of the book, The Situation, A Radical Journey for Sisterhood. Hi, Lila.
Hi, Sam. So nice to talk with you today.
It's been a while. It's been a
Yes,
while.
yes, it has.
There's a lot to cover, so let's get to it. You and your sister, Carolyn, are 2 years apart. She's 2 years older than you are, which is not much growing up.
Right.
You had a fairly good childhood, great parents, raised you both well. And
Yes.
in Minnesota, naturally, you both got older and wiser. You both got married. You had a girl, she had a boy. And then life happened. My least favorite phrase of all times.
Yes.
Thank you so much for mentioning me in your book. On page 46, you had mentioned that you contacted me, which is true, to help you find a place for Carolyn to rent for a few weeks, but it needs to be very close to Cedar Sinai in Los Angeles because she'd be going through some treatments. I think it was weekly treatments, I'm not sure. Can you tell the
Yes.
listeners what was the treatment, what had transpired, what brought all this on?
Sure. So, Carolyn was diagnosed having really no symptoms except for a little bit of memory loss and a little minuscule crazy things that happened if you knew her, changes in her personality. She was diagnosed with brain cancer. We found out after her tumor was removed, her first tumor, that it was glioblastoma brain cancer, which is a kind of terminal cancer that has yet to find a cure. She had glioblastoma giant malform, which is pretty much the most intense diagnosis of that kind of brain cancer you can get. And Carolyn was luckily admitted to a program at Cedar Sinai that was part of a medical trial of one of the leading surgeon researchers in the country regarding glioblastoma, Dr. John Wu. So Carolyn would go down and get a combination of radiation and chemotherapy, in addition to trying out his groundbreaking vaccine, which was vaccine made out of her own tumor.
Wow.
In hopes that it would treat her. He's had a lot of life elongation success with that treatment, but no one has, beaten glioblastoma, of course. But that's why she was down there, and she lived about 14 months under his care and another Dr. Jeremy Rudnick, who was also on the forefront of treating glioblastoma.
So when you found out and Carolyn found out the serious of the diagnosis, what's the first thing that went through your mind?
Honestly, Sam, I just collapsed. I thought, oh my God, because first of all, I heard the word, I had never heard the word glioblastoma. And so I Googled it, and it said 13 months of survival was normal. At maximum for people diagnosed with that disease, even with treatment. And I just collapsed. I mean, I'm the younger sister, so it never occurred to me that my big sister would leave this earth in her 40s. She was only 46 when she died. And she had a very young son. And it rocked my world in a way that my world had never been rocked.
But that was in the beginning. Like, I'm talking about that. We'll get to the end. How you felt. But when you found out initially, and you're still going through the treatment and surgery number 1 and surgery number 2.
I'm talking about initially. Like yes, and that was the really tricky part of this. Is I had no idea how I would equip myself to be with somebody. She was staying in my home as well. It was so weird with timing because she had purchased the house across the street from me so the kids could grow up together, and she had moved into my guest house. And I, at first, of course, I had a little bit of denial. I had a little bit of hope, but really, when you read that, there's a part of you that you just, it felt fatal. But I still had to keep upbeat for her. She had hope a lot longer than I did.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, you always have the attitude when someone's diagnosed with cancer, because we've been conditioned to do that in this country, especially,
Right.
you're going to beat this thing. And people would say, oh, you can get past this. But in your head, you're going, but wait, no one has.
Right.
Although,
I'll be the first one.
right. And you know what? She was such a groundbreaking art dealer and
Right.
big personality that, of course, you know, that hits your head for like a moment of,
Right.
with that hope.
Right.
But I think really early on, it became clear to us that it was going to be the miracle of all time if she.
And why
beat
not,
this.
right? Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Right.
Right?
Why
Yeah.
not?
So you also mentioned, which I thought is really, really important point, the correlation between the event of 9/11 in New York City and
Yes.
Carolyn's dream to have an art gallery, which she accomplished, and
Yes.
her diagnosis.
So she said that being reviewed for her art gallery in the New York Times twice was her version of getting an Academy Award.
Right.
You know, she had a very successful art gallery, art business, but she was there during 9/11. And in fact, she was working out at her gym on Chelsea Pier and watched people jumping from the World Trade Center when the planes hit, and just thought, as any of us would, maybe they're filming a movie.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
not sure what was happening. And then obviously as the day progressed, it became clear my husband and I were staying with her. We had just gone to a wedding in Newport, Rhode Island, and we were staying with her afterwards. And so Carolyn and her husband, Chris, my husband, Dines, and I were all together. And as the day progressed, we were like in disbelief. And what ended up happening, long story short, is they said that not the event itself, but the long cleanup of that event, which really took over a year, made the air quality in New York City really toxic. And so there was a surge between 11 years and 13 years later of immunity cancers in New York City for people that owned businesses around the area, people that lived around the area. And obviously the first people that took the hit were first responders who, you know, were really
Right.
on top of the rubble. So there was a surge in glioblastoma, specifically in brain cancers, because it is an immunity cancer. And it was almost to the day of that 13 years that she got diagnosed. And it was just crazy to think that, you know, that air that we couldn't see, that air that she was breathing was what could have given her glioblastoma cancer. But it was actually became commonplace. There was a 65% increase in people whose businesses were around the 9/11 site and the World Trade Center site. And Carolyn's gallery was very, very nearby. And she was either there or her gym, which was also in that neighborhood.
Did her doctors think that the same thought that you have thought?
You know, her doctors were really interesting because they are more about like,
Science?
yeah, about, you know, they said, we have heard that before. Her doctor, John Yu, was really interesting because he said he believed that glioblastoma was actually more an immunity issue like AIDS than it was a cancer. And that's why he was trying to create new vaccines that could work dealing with it as an immunity issue.
Got it.
What's interesting is when he first went to school to study the brain and study how to be a brain surgeon, places in America, in our country, were not sort of sharing that medical perspective, but France was.
Right.
And he spoke fluent French. So he went and studied at the Sorbonne immunity cancers and really became groundbreaking as being one of the first people to realize we needed to treat this as an immunity problem, not specifically a cancer. Yeah.
Interesting. So now she went through surgery number 1, which we all know. I mean, I've seen my sister, she had breast cancer, so I've seen similar, but not as yours. I wouldn't even compare the two. Surgery number 1, which is completely chemo. Surgery number 2, in your case, and you're seeing the depletion of the body, and now they want to do surgery number 3. You lose your shit, basically. And
I lost my shit.
yeah, and I don't blame you because did the same thing with my sister's doctor. And I said, "What are you doing?" And my sister's reaction was, I want to do it because I don't want it to spread to the rest of my body." And I'm thinking, that's your analogy? So Carolyn also wanted to do it. Do you think what was Carolyn's reasoning for wanting to do a third miserable process, painful?
Well, I think it's really important for people to realize that if you're trusting someone with their sort of their opinion of their own care at the point of which they've already had 2 brain surgeries and they're suffering from glioblastoma,
Right?
they aren't really the same person they were at
Before.
the onset of their diagnosis. So Carolyn always said, when it's time, and I'm not going to keep doing this. So part of the reason for me, quote, losing my shit was that I never expected her to say she wanted a 3rd surgery, but she was such a different version of herself by that point
That you're
that,
not surprised.
yeah, she would just agree with the doctors who, of course, are going to keep trying to make a
Right.
cure and
Right.
trying to fix it.
Right.
It wasn't until she started actually having a loss of vision and a loss of mobility, one side of her body where the tumor was pressuring against all those nerves really started collapsing and her movement got hard. It wasn't until then, and that
She
was
said,
after
"I'm done."
that she said she was done, and that was
Done.
after the 3rd surgery.
Right.
So she did have the 3rd one, even though I was against it.
Right. And it's very difficult when you're against it and because I knew I was against it and you still want to go through it and you have like you're 1 against 5 people or whatever, and you can't win this argument. And what do you do except let them have their way?
Yeah.
But the result is not going to be, great. So it's very difficult on the person that's the caretaker as well.
Yeah,
And
you
then,
just love them through it, I
know.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah. But then comes what's expected: depression on your end.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not surprised at all. I know there was one post that your husband had to call your friends from LA just to come to hold you because you're just, it's expected. I am not surprised. I'm not shocked, but I want the listeners to hear from you. How bad did it get? And how are you healing from it? If you're still healing, hopefully you've healed.
Sure. Here's the deal. I realized kind of in my life, I had never been that upset. And that was an amazing revolution because I always thought, gosh, I don't understand these people who get super upset and they can't get out of bed. And,
right.
Because I have to say, I am a person that it takes a lot to get me that depressed.
Right. I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
And I did sort of realize that about myself. And it was really, really scary to be that depressed. It's that, you go through the stages of that. Like, I needed the support of my friends, but I also wanted to be alone. I was probably drinking too much wine. I couldn't sleep unless I took melatonin. I was, you think of every worst case scenario, but then you have to hold it together in your depression for these people and really for these 2 beautiful children, my daughter, who was very close to my sister, and my nephew, who then I was his primary caretaker.
And your husband?
And my husband, I mean, I have to say I'm married to an amazing guy who, Sam,
I know.
that, he is incredible in circumstances like that. And I was so lucky with that. But, I wasn't eating. I got the thinnest I'd ever been in my life, which I realized, oh, I'm someone who isn't, an ice cream eater in a really bad time. Right. I'm someone that physically has no appetite. And so just getting through that and sort of, I guess the thing that helped me through is actually facing myself. And I started journaling and I started really focusing on what is my journey. And I feel like, you can't make a messy story clean. So I just wrote down what was messy. Like,
you cannot make a messy story clean. I like that.
No. So, it was messy and I wrote down like, and I say in the book, even when do I go to bed with red wine? I'd wake up and see half a glass on the nightstand or, right. It was really, really draining. It was really draining because also on top of Carolyn's treatment, she was taking steroids, which make people out of their
Out of
mind.
their mind. Yep, yep,
It,
yep,
it,
yep.
it makes them very aggressive many times. So
And
it
you had to hold the floor. You pretty much even though you're the female there's two other males included, but you were the only female, and you had to pretty much hold the floor, I'm gathering.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
did. And the journaling really helped me work it out sort of on the page. You know,
right.
I get up early in the morning to exercise and then go about my day. And then I would stay up late journaling or, you know, and that journal is what turned my story into this book.
And how long
And
did that take as far as the healing process? Were you still um, dealing after the after mass, or you still this is and did you heal before the final?
no, I didn't.
You did
I
not.
feel like I was journaling up until the end, and then I was actually
A mess.
I was a mess. And when I started writing the book, which actually really helped and it was really therapeutic to
Yeah,
do it
I was just
and,
saying.
and put it all together and look back, there were still parts I couldn't write, like
Right.
the ending of the book, which was
I'm gonna get
reliving,
to
you
that in a
know.
minute. Save that thought. Don't save the thought. That's on
Okay.
my list. Save that.
You know, but just saying that there were parts of even just of writing or revisiting my story that I had to take a break from,
Yeah.
because just even thinking about it again, you know, was too painful. And even writing it, you know, my mom, who's 80 years old, and you have to imagine this is her firstborn child who's
Hold on. Hold
dying.
hold the mom thought. Hold the mom thought.
Okay.
Because I hold the mom thought. I have her in my list here. Why did you call the book The Situation?
Because Carolyn, by the end of her life, had about 60 words left in her vocabulary,
Right.
just from all the brain surgeries. And so when she couldn't think of a word, she'd say, you know, help me with this situation.
Right.
And she'd sort of point to it. We got really good at charades. And then I realized that that's what she started referring to, what was going on with her head is, you
The
know,
situation.
this situation. And so I thought, what a perfect title for the book.
Right. No, I
And
get it.
yeah.
I get it. I don't know if you remember. You might not. I had a dream. I think it was before the story started. In the dream, you were pregnant, and I had texted you and told you, and you had a dream that you were pregnant, and your reply was, "Great, it's not gonna happen. We're very happy with what we have." I'm like, okay. And after reading your book, and clearly my dream came to fruition because you do have a second child. And in
Yeah.
the book, there were two other prophecies, call it prophecies, that had mentioned the same thing to you. So as humans, we don't remember every little detail till they come to fruition.
Right.
So like I don't know if you remember my dream now or just mentioned it or you ever remembered after. I mean, I remember the dream vividly.
Yes.
And then you had two other people, I'm not sure when they were in the book, that told you something about similar to that. And now here you are the sole caretaker of your nephew, which we'll talk about more in a second. So I thought that was interesting um, from all points of view, from the other points of view of the people that told you and when I had the dream. But yeah, so I'm not sure if you remember the dream, but
I
it was
do
definitely
remember it.
before. Yeah, it was definitely before the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Um, the last day when you moved Carolyn across the street,
Mm.
um, and you had your daughter and your nephew in one house with you, and you moved Carolyn across the street because things were changing rapidly. The morning after, what happened and how did you process with the children and your mother?
Well, you know, my daughter Fliss knew what was going on. She was old enough to sort of figure out, and she didn't want to go to school, said she wasn't feeling well. Matson didn't seem to know that his mom had been moved across the street. We didn't tell him. I should say, we moved her across the street because we knew at the end when people with glioblastoma are passing that they often go into a coma, and then, you know, you can make scary gasping breathing sounds, and we didn't want to freak out the children. We sent him to school. I just felt it was easier to have all my attention on Carolyn, and he didn't need to be seeing those last moments.
Right.
So Carolyn's husband went on a walk, he, you know, had woken up with her sort of the next morning after we moved her across the street, and she was in a coma, and he was like, I need to get out of here. So I went across the street, and my daughter said, I know what's going on. I want to go with you. And she was still very, very young. She was 11. And so she went with me, and we played Sarah Vaughan music, and we, you know, we sat with Carolyn across the street for the entire day. And with my mother, I waited until we told my mom that she, you know, was in a coma, but we waited until she had passed to call my mom, or right when we thought it was happening.
How long after that was?
I think like a minute after,
Oh,
honestly. She actually passed while I had been with her all day, and I finally hadn't eaten, and I went down the street to the Farmer and the Cook, our organic grocery store here in Ojai, and I grabbed some lunch, and Chris called and said she just quit breathing. So he had come back for like 2 seconds, and I called my mom on my way back to the house, and my mom met us there.
how was the phone call to your mom?
You know what, Sam, I have to say, I don't even remember it.
To this day, you don't.
No. I mean, I do remember her getting there, and I do remember that I made the call, but I don't, you know, luckily my mind has blacked out that dark memory.
Interesting.
It was
Okay.
like, you're almost in, you know, just you're in remote control.
If you're the younger daughter telling your mom about the older sister,
yeah,
you know, it normally doesn't happen that way, or shouldn't happen that way, but it did.
It shouldn't. Although I do have to say, after watching her struggle for 14 months,
You kind of knew.
We knew it would happen. And, you know, I did expect there would be a little more relief than there was, but there is a little inkling of, I'm just so glad to see her out of pain.
Right.
I'm just so glad to see, you know, to have a solution, to have an ending, a conclusion.
And how did you process Matson?
That was horrible.
That I want to know.
Yeah, he came home from school, and he was a mess.
How did you tell him?
We brought him in and said she's gone, and he and my daughter just held each other and cried. And it still makes me cry thinking about it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
How is he now?
He's great now. I mean, you know, I think there were definitely 3 years where it was hard to find a smile.
Really?
And I don't think that was conscious. I think it was just a kid whose whole life had changed.
Of course. How old was he then?
He was 9.
He was 9.
Yeah. And then maybe about a year ago, the smiles became, you know, more prevalent, and he's I want to say back to his old self.
Right.
And, you know, we have happy memories of his mom. We talk about her all the time. Luckily, he had been with me so much of his childhood, because she traveled so much for work, that I think he's always grown up kind of with 2 moms and 2 dads. And so that was the best gift that could have happened. But, you know, I think it's really hard being a little kid, losing your mom. And I think at least, I mean, there's a lot of studies on it saying, you know, at least he had his same-sex parent left. That, you know, so he and dad do dad stuff that I can't fill in for Matson with.
Right.
And, you know, so it's a really good, and what's great is Dines and Chris are such different dads. Chris is more like Chris likes to hike and deal with computers and talk about physics and things like that.
He's the nerd one.
Yeah. And a sophisticated nerd, sure.
Right.
And you know, Dines is more like, let's learn to skateboard and surf and you know, have go through the In-N-Out drive-through. Like he's more the carefree kind of guy. So Matson has a really good balance, and you know, And he has me, and he and my sister and I were incredibly a lot alike. I think
Right.
she was maybe a little more intense than me, and I remind him of that when he's like, well, my mom, I say, oh, you're lucky that I am dealing with this and not your mother, because she would have flipped out.
Right, 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 right.
Yeah.
You also started a Carolyn Glasoe Bailey Foundation.
Yes.
What is that about?
Well, so after Carolyn's, well, actually during Carolyn's diagnosis, so many artists reach out. Carolyn had really launched the careers of many upcoming artists from Minneapolis, from LA, from New York, and they all were really feeling the loss of her and sort of the diagnosis of her. Some of them visited, some sent, I received some beautiful artwork from some artists just saying thank you for taking care of, you know, our girl.
Right,
They, you know, Carolyn had been a very generous art dealer, paying for you know, trips to art fairs for artists, hooking them up with great art dealers or galleries. She really was an advocate. And so what's interesting about our foundation is it is a foundation started by artists. You know, Fliss and Matson and Chris and I were sitting around, and we actually, the symbol of the foundation is 6 circles that are intertwined, which represent each of us.
right,
And we just said, how best can we remember, you know, Carolyn's vision? And we really felt it was from really responding to this outpouring of support from artists. So we had 38 artists send work in, which we sold in an exhibit called Fierce Generosity, named after a really good description of Carolyn, who was fiercely generous.
love it.
And that launched our foundation, the Carolyn Glasoe Bailey Foundation, which you can find online at cgbfoundation.org. And now we actually have an initiative from that foundation as well called the Ojai Institute, which is free educational arts programming and a residency program. So, you know, it's very comforting to have
Very comforting.
all of those things, because
Very
it's so,
comforting.
yeah, she
Yeah,
always wanted to have an art foundation,
right,
and it's sort of, in fact, before she died, we talked about wanting to do that. And
right.
she actually picked the executive director of her foundation currently.
Before she left.
Before she died, I said, who do you want to have run your art foundation? And she said, Freddie. So Frederick Jonka is the head of the foundation, our executive director, and he does a terrific job. And, you know, I think we're 4 years old now, and we, you know, of course we're a nonprofit. So this year's been a really big challenge, but
Right.
we've really made such a difference in our community and such a great niche in the art world, that I couldn't be more proud
And
of
it's great for
having done
Matson.
that.
It's
It's
great
so
for
great for
Matson.
him because
Yeah,
he, you know, it also keeps us connected. We travel a lot still and look at art, just like we did with Carolyn.
right.
You know, and a lot of those artists, you know, grew up knowing, I mean, Matson grew up knowing them. So he still has really beautiful relationships with many of them. And it's fun to see where their careers are going now as well. And of course, being able to support them any way we can to elevate their careers even more. The foundation still has all those connections with those artists that were important to her.
Amazing. Where can the listeners find your book?
You can find my book via my website, thesituationbook.com, or the easiest thing to do is just go to Amazon, put in the whole title of the book, The Situation, A Radical Journey Through Sisterhood, and my picture's on the cover with my sister. And I appreciate if you like it, please leave a review.
Please.
Or there is a link again through the website.
Great. Couple of questions and we're going to wrap this up. What did COVID teach you?
You know, COVID has taught me that I'm someone that doesn't necessarily get bored. I've started learning to play the guitar. I've written half of a second book. It was so nice to have time like that again.
Right.
It's also really taught me, of course, reiterated to me the beautiful people that I'm surrounded by in my life. I have a huge, huge love for what I call my pod, right? Which isn't just my family, but sort of friends that have stayed safe, and we've stayed safe so we can see one another.
Right.
I'm really appreciative of our life.
Okay.
I also feel like it's made me realize that some things should be dealt with and other things shouldn't. I think for everyone, it's been a really good cleaning out. Like
Right.
work-wise, what don't I want to deal with? I'm not dealing with that. Life's too short. Or, you know,
Right.
what do I love dealing with? Let's do more of that. So
Right.
it's been a good place of self-reflection
Right.
and appreciation. And gosh, I hope we're out of COVID soon, though. I might have had enough of it at this point.
I think we all have had enough of lots of things.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave with an unusual ending, hopefully in the hope that you'll come back and talk about this. You and Carolyn are sisters, biological sisters, but your parents had other siblings. If you can just give us a 60-second description on that, and in the hope that would be a teaser to come back and talk about this information, if you will.
Sure. So growing up in the 70s and 80s, my parents sponsored foster children who were permanently placed foster children from Vietnam, which was actually a wonderful initiative that happened shockingly through a Republican president, which really hooked up Vietnamese children in need in refugee camps with American families to grow up with. And I have 5 foster siblings. We grew up very close. I didn't bring that up in the book because my editor thought that's a whole separate book.
Yes, I agree. And I agree. And that's why I said, hopefully, when you get ready, you'll come back here and share, because they're 2 different stories. I didn't want to take away from this, and your editor is very correct.
You know, it was an amazing childhood, and it was, you know, that whole experience really taught us how lucky we were growing up where we are, that we didn't have to escape a country at 7 years old, that my mom wanted us to grow up thinking from a more global perspective, and that was accomplished.
Right. Lila, thank you so much for coming out, sharing the story between you and your sister. It's not an easy story to share, but I hope the audience got to hear it and got inspired by it. And please go get the book. It's a very small book. I finished it in 1 day, couldn't put it down. And you don't have to be a sister or have a sister to relate to it. Obviously, I'm not a sister. I don't have any sisters right now, but the book is very relatable in so many ways. So thank you again, Lila. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please come back. Please subscribe. Until next week, we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Sam.